Are you looking for an experience that will grow your teenagers' faith, increase their leadership skills, and teach them the discernment to engage with the world all around them, all while taking them on the adventure of a lifetime? I mean, who isn't looking for that? If your teenager loves fun, adventure, and wants to grow in their faith and leadership this summer, then send them to Excel's Summer Leadership Camp. Excel's Summer Leadership Camp is a 12-day experience for passionate young leaders looking to discover God's truth, to discern wisely, and live wholeheartedly. Your teenager will embark on a transformative journey in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they'll build lasting friendships in the context of community, embark on thrilling adventures like camping, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and they will receive expert training and certifications in categories like CPR and wilderness first aid. Each aspect of the camp is woven together to help them learn to discover truth, to discern wisely, and take godly action in the context of real-life situations. To learn more or begin an application, go to theexcelcamp.org. That's theexcelcamp.org. Hurry, because summer is just around the corner.
So he saved 6 of his fellow Rangers on that battlefield that cost him his life. So he has those 6 lives that he saved. And then he directly saved the people who received his heart, kidneys, and liver. With the donation of bone, skin, and tissue, he enhanced the lives of about 55 more people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Reclamation Podcast. I am honored and humbled to bring you today's featured conversation with Gold Star mother Jill Stephenson. Jill lost her son, Army Ranger Ben Kopp, in Afghanistan due to sniper fire, and she shares his story and her story of what it means to overcome adversity, to how to deal with faith in the midst of tragedy, and how to listen to God when your world feels like it's falling apart. I'm so excited for you to listen to this conversation, and I pray and hope that you get as much out of it as I did. As always, the best compliment that you can give us, leave a rating, review, or share the podcast with maybe somebody who's never listened to it before. We'd love to continue to spread the word about what God is doing through the Reclamation Podcast. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with Jill Stephenson. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Reclamation Podcast. I'm excited to bring you today's featured guest, Jill Stephenson, and she's got an incredible story to tell. Jill, how the heck are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Tony. Thanks for having me on.
It is totally my honor. You hold a distinction which not many people do, and it both comes with a bunch of honor and a bunch of sorrow. You hold the distinction of being a Gold Star mom. So thank you so much for your service. And I was really hoping if we could just jump right into your story and how all this happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the distinction that you're referring to is that of being a Gold Star mother. And a Gold Star mother is a mother, of course, who's lost an immediate, well, I'm not going to say immediate. Let me say this again. Gold Star families become Gold Star families when we lose an immediate family member to active duty military service. Prior to that, we're Blue Star families when our loved ones are actively serving. If they're killed in action, then we become a Gold Star family. So I am a Gold Star mother, meaning that my son gave his life while actively serving in the military as an Army Ranger, actually.
Which that's a really elite school. It's a really elite calling in life. Yes. As a veteran myself, like everyone looks to the Rangers and wonders what happens on the other side of the privacy fence. Yes. But what made your son want to be a Ranger? I mean, what brings somebody to that kind of calling?
Gosh, well, there's always a story that goes with that. It certainly isn't luck of the draw or something that happened, came to be by happenstance. Ben was very strongly influenced by my grandfather, his great-grandfather, who was a World War II veteran.
Wow.
I raised Ben as a single mother. He was my only child. And so my grandfather was Ben's strongest male role model. We grew up spending time at my grandparents' lake home in northern Minnesota. And my grandfather had a curio cabinet inside the cabin that had his World War II memorabilia in it. It had his certificate. It had a Purple Heart. It had some things from the Red Bulls. He was a Minnesota Red Bull. And some photos.
And that's an Army unit, right?
That is an Army unit.
Yeah, the Red Bulls, yeah.
Yep. And it's 34th Infantry Division is
Sure.
what that is. Yep. And Ben started asking questions to his great-grandfather when he was about 7 years old. He wanted to know what all that stuff was, and he wanted to hear stories about it. And so my grandfather started telling him things about the items in the curio cabinet. And as Ben got older, he continued to ask him questions and wanted to know more and more details about what he was telling him. And he grew curious, and not too much longer, he started to speak about joining the Army himself.
Once it gets in your veins, it's impossible to get out.
Yeah, and he started so young, and it was as he grew to admire my grandfather more, and the relationship between them grew. Ben really honestly worshiped the ground that he walked on, and he wanted to be just like him. My grandfather recognized that as Ben got to an age, 10, 11, 12-ish, where he could understand more what my grandfather would say to him about being in the Army himself, and Ben wanting to join the Army. And my grandfather told Ben that it really, he shouldn't copy what my grandfather did. He said that imitation was not flattery, that you should become what you're meant to become, not what somebody else is. And that one day you'll know what that is, because you're going to get a gut feeling, and it's going to be something that you're not going to be able to back away from, something that will be very recognizable to you. And so Ben said, okay, great. Well, when I grow up, I want to join the Army just like you. So,
right. That's perfect.
It's perfect. It
typical middle school boy.
Exactly. It resonated with him. However, it did, but it didn't change his mind. It didn't change his mind. Well, in the spring of 2001, my grandfather succumbed to cancer. He was sick for off and on for about a year. He had a small surgery that he just really didn't recover from. And it was the first death that Ben had experienced.
Yeah.
He was 13, just barely 13, and it absolutely crushed him. It hurt him so much, he told me that he didn't want to talk about it. And I didn't make him talk about it because he was 13.
Sure.
13-year-old boys really don't, they kind of speak their own language anyway. That's mumbles.
I've got a 13-year-old right now, and it's a series of grunts and uhs.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I just let him be. I'm like, no, that's okay. It's probably better that you don't speak of it anyhow. So I let him be until 5 months later when 9/11 happened.
Oh, wow.
Now, only 5 months later. And at that point, immediately, Ben's sadness turned to anger, and he wanted revenge. And as we're watching all of the footage that was on the television, sitting there together, he really became this fire, like this inferno just exploded in his belly. And he said, when I grow up again, there it is. I'm going to become an Army Ranger, find Osama bin Laden, and make him pay.
Now, do you think, Jill, and I know you've been in these communities a lot, do you think that, because I've never really thought about it like this before, but 9/11 galvanized a generation of soldiers and Marines and airmen and seamen?
Without question. I think of 9/11, Tony, as the date in time, the event in time that sealed my son's fate. There was no turning back when 9/11 happened. He never took his eye off of that.
So then, to that point, what does that spurn inside of you as a date and an event? I mean, obviously it's sad for everyone. Mm-hmm. Does it change the meaning of the day for you?
Absolutely, it does. It to me, it's stuck in time just as much as the day that Ben was shot, just as much as the day that Ben died. 9/11 is another day on the calendar that my body knows is coming.
Oh, wow.
It really does. And I feel a great sadness on that day for all the families that have sacrificed. All the families that have sacrificed since 9/11, since 2001. Today is actually the 18th anniversary of when we first sent troops over there after 9/11 happened. And so here we are 18 years later, and how many lives have been lost? How many, not just the lives that were lost in New York. and in Pennsylvania, but in Washington, D.C., but the lives have been lost since then for all those 13-year-old boys like my son, who decided at that very moment that they wanted vengeance. They wanted to, put some skin in the game and sign on the dotted line. And for my son, it was personal. He actually took it personal, and he felt that 9/11 was a mockery of his great-grandfather's service to America.
Wow.
And so, here he was feeling so incredibly sad over losing somebody, and he'd never experienced the death of anybody prior to that. And he had such great honor for this man. And then, we have terrorists that, managed to get in our country and murder innocent people. And so it absolutely sealed Ben's fate and changed my life too.
So then Ben signs up for Ranger, signs on the dotted line for all of it, not just some of it, right? And
Yes.
becomes an Army Ranger. As a mom of a soldier who's going through that elite training, what are you thinking about while he's away? Because that training is lengthy. It's not like it's basic training. For those that don't know, it's basic training, and then it's your AIT, which in infantry school is continuous.
Yep.
And then if you're good enough, which Ben was, it's Ranger School, which is another 90 days, right?
Days, yeah.
What's going through your head as you see your son being transformed into this elite soldier?
It was, what happened prior to him becoming a Ranger and just going into the military period. Number one, I always supported him. There was never a question in my mind or my heart that that's what Ben's purpose was. And so I didn't get in the way of him signing on that dotted line. I knew it was something that he was going to do. And I could see that it was his purpose. Because I raised him as a single mom, my focus for 18 years was on him, 100% on him. He was my life. And as the days got closer of him leaving for basic training, I started to feel really sad because it made me take a harder look at who I was. Who's Jill going to be now that I won't be Ben's mom? Not that I was losing that role, but I was, like I said, I was full-time taking care of that kid for 18 years, and now he was leaving, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And my faith got a lot stronger at that point, Tony. That was a real turning point for my faith at that time, because I realized that I was not only turning Ben over fully into God's hands in a way that I had never done before, but it shined the light on me as well, that I was also turning myself over to the care of God. And I had not viewed my life that way before.
Was there a catalytic moment in that part, or was it like the day he left for basic training and you and God had this battle mano-a-mano, or take us through the practical? Because I think that there are probably a lot of people right now who are wondering what their next is.
Yeah, there wasn't a certain moment. There were moments that led up to it, because Ben would sit in this computer room. We lived in a 3-bedroom townhome, and the third bedroom was a computer room. And he would sit in there and listen to, he'd be on his MySpace,
Oh, yes. MySpace. That's excellent.
Yes. Listening to music and singing. And I would just stand in the doorway and stare at him and feel this sadness, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe pretty soon he won't be sitting in that chair. And that's when I started to have these conversations with God, and have these conversations, with myself, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do without him? And who am I going to be without him here?
Yeah.
And so it was a gradual turn of what's next. And it got me prepared. Knowing that he was leaving helped prepare me for him leaving. Now, I was never worried about Ben surviving in an independent sort of a way. He was a very, very independent young man and fully capable of taking care of himself. There was no question about that. But it was the distance that there was going to be between us, the logistics. And then again, as the special operations contract became a reality, knowing that he was going to be out of reach and out of touch and in harm's way, that just made my faith have to grow stronger. It had to.
In hindsight, do you how do you feel the differences knowing that he's gone now and when he left the first time?
I think I was being prepared for it.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. Yeah, I was definitely being prepared for it. And in some ways, he's closer to me now.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
He surrounds me 24/7 spiritually. He's with me 24/7 spiritually, where when we have people in our lives physically, when we're living, breathing humans, the physical absence is different than a spiritual presence.
How long did he think it take you to come? I mean, that's a very mature response as a woman who's clearly walked with God and done the hard work of grieving and still grieving, rightfully so.
Yeah.
How do you get to that place?
I think only by having a strong faith, by having a strong measure of faith and knowing fully where Ben is, knowing fully where all of our loved ones go, hopefully.
Right.
I have no doubt where Ben is, and I feel him with me all the time, and I get signs from him all the time that he's around me. And
can you tell us about one of them?
Oh, sure. Well, most people have signs from their loved ones, a physical sign that they attune with their presence, and it's butterflies, ladybugs, hawks, shooting stars, daisies, roses.
I hear cardinals a lot.
Cardinals is another very common one. Dragonflies is something, pennies, finding coins. My sign from Ben is a moth. A moth.
Why a moth? Because it's so romantic?
I don't know. Not a butterfly, it's definitely a moth. And it was the day that I came home from Ben's funeral in our hometown in Rosemount, Minnesota. Was a long, long day with the funeral. And then I hosted a dinner later that evening for a select few people. And by the time I got home, I was exhausted and it was dark in the house. And I came in and turned on the lights, and in the entryway, I lived in a split level townhome. So on the wall that went down towards where Ben's room was, there was this white moth. It was a very small moth, but it was bright, bright white. And it caught my eye, and I walked over to the wall and I said, "You are the brightest, whitest, purest little moth I've ever seen." And it was one of those that it looks like if you touch the wings that it would just turn to dust.
Oh, wow.
We're fragile like that. And when I reached to touch it, it flew toward the light. The overhead light. And I said, "Oh my gosh, you're one of those light chasers." And I put myself back in that moment, seeing it and with my own eyes, seeing that happen. And from that moment, I walked up the steps, and as I turned lights on, I turned them off behind me I went up to my room, and that moth followed me, and it landed on the wall next to my bed, and it stayed there all night, and it didn't move. When I got up in the morning, it was still there.
Oh.
And I have had thousands of moth stories in the last 10 years. And that was the very first one.
Incredible.
Yeah. It's some crazy, crazy stories.
It's funny how the Holy Spirit just shows up and can really manifest itself in so many different ways.
Oh, yeah. I love it. I absolutely love it.
So backtracking just a little bit, Ben goes to Ranger School and is super successful. And then obviously being a Ranger is a life of rapid deployments.
Yes.
Had he been deployed before? How many times, or was this his first deployment, or how did you come to that, that awful day?
He did 2 deployments prior to the final deployment. So he had a total of 3. The first two were in Iraq, and the third one was Afghanistan.
And after each deployment, how was Ben coming back, and how was that for you?
After the first deployment, he came home and he was definitely changed. He thought that he got taller. And when he came home, he said, "Mom, I think I grew." And he said, can we go measure? And, you have that spot on the wall. And for us, it was down in the laundry room.
Sure.
And I thought that he looked taller too, because he carried himself taller. He appeared taller, as my grandfather actually taught all of us kids, grandchildren, great-grandchildren alike, from when we were young, to walk confidently, that we should always have our chest out, shoulders back, chin up. And Ben learned that as well from me, and it actually became something that he was known for, but I digress. However, that was where, his standing tall and proud came from. So he came back from this first deployment with this increased confidence. And so we went down the basement, and he took off his shoes and socks, and I'm standing there, on a step stool, because he's about 7 inches taller than me. Well, 9 inches taller than me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And with a pencil, and I'm like, "Sorry, bud, you're not taller. You're bigger inside. You're definitely a bigger man now than you were before, but your height hasn't physically changed." So
that's incredible. I think that happens for a lot of soldiers. Something about when you live out that mission and purpose in a specific way, it begins to change the way you see the world. It sounds like that was the case for Ben.
Absolutely. It was a good fit for him. It really was. And he had his fair share of struggles too after the second deployment, coming home, and that as much as they want to come home and they want to be a part of the civilian world and just relax and be away from the regiment of the military, it's still difficult because they're not coming back to what they're used to, and people aren't warm to it.
It's so hard for people to understand that it's when you're a soldier and you leave for deployment, it's like you get off the escalator and you expect to get back on the escalator in the exact same place, but everyone's moved. And so it's this kind of this duality of, man, the world I just left, I don't want to go back to, but the world I came back to, I'm not sure what to do with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so difficult. It's so difficult.
Yeah.
So that, I think that resonates for a lot of us, and a good reminder for all the people who don't know to take the time to talk to soldiers, who are coming back, because it's just it's such an important thing.
Yes, it is.
So take us through that kind of that horrible day, and tell Ben's story. And then I'd love to hear how I just can't even imagine. How do you get through that?
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
Well, Ben, as I said, did 2 deployments to Iraq. And as the third one approached, he was aware that it was going to be different than the other 2. They were going to Afghanistan this time, and things were, they knew, they were warned, were going to be, they were going to see a lot more combat than he had prior to that. And Ben had trepidations about it, and he expressed that to myself, my mother, and just 1 or 2 other people, 1 or 2 of his close friends. The Rangers train for these deployments. They train all year long to go on these deployments and to be able to live out the missions, to do the work that they train to do. But in this case, Ben didn't have that sense of, yeah, I'm ready, let's go get him. He had fears, and he didn't want to go. He didn't want to go. He said that he didn't want to go. but it wasn't ever a question of him not going.
Right.
He just knew that he was going to be facing things that he never had before. And Ben would also never, ever, ever, ever turn his back on his brothers or his
Of course. Yeah,
Absolutely.
of course.
Absolutely not. So off he went, and it was right around Mother's Day, right after Mother's Day. He actually snuck home for one last visit over Mother's Day weekend. And he literally, like, he was not AWOL, but he was AWOL. Like his
Right.
security,
They would, yeah.
they didn't know he was gone, but
He didn't break the rule, but he probably bent it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. So I got to see him. He had a 3-week leave prior to that. And then he came home about 2 weeks later for a long weekend. But anyway, 2 days after he left, he called me and said that one of his buddies had been killed in Iraq. One of his Ranger buddies, who was in a different company, but obviously because he was in Iraq and Ben was going to Afghanistan. But he had just this incredible heaviness to his voice when he called me, and I knew something was wrong. And he said, my buddy McGee was killed. And I said, I'm sorry to hear that, Ben. And he said, well, now it's game on. And so that fire got lit in his belly, and he was ready to rock now, because now we had some revenge. He wanted to avenge the death of his buddy, Ryan McGee. So off he went to Afghanistan. And when they're deployed, things are different now. If anybody's listening that has someone that's deployed, whether it's Special Operations or Big Army, this was 2009. So it was 10 years ago. The communication was different then than it is now. So we never had Skype conversations. We never had texting, that was allowed overseas. The conversation that I had with him was very limited, and it probably happened maybe every 3 weeks or so. And so Ben called me on July 1st, and he again had this heaviness to his voice. And he told me that things were as ugly and as bad as they projected them to be. And he was feeling pretty down. He was feeling pretty down, but he had read a book recently, was reading a book that was by a gentleman who was a Ranger chaplain and also served in Somalia during the Mogadishu time. And he was very touched by that. So he had some inspiration as well, but he just was feeling down. I could feel it. And we talked about what he was going to do when he got home. And the last thing we said when we hung up was, "I love you." And that was on July 1st. And then on July 10th, 9 days later, I got a call that Ben had been shot. That he'd been shot by a sniper. I was at work. It was about 3:00 on a Friday afternoon. And that he had undergone surgery but had yet to wake up. And they would call me again when they had more information. And that is that definitely was a turning point in my life. That definitely was a dividing point, and not just, turn a page kind of a thing, a dividing point where a steel door dropped right in front of my nose and landed at the tips of my toes. And I've never been able to go back that same direction. It's just absolutely not possible. You have no choice when a trauma like that happens. Everything becomes different.
Joe, can I ask, how long did you have to wait before they called back?
Not very long, but it wasn't a big update at that point. It was maybe like 2 hours later when they called back.
What I guess, like in the moments of that kind of, the scariest trauma in the world, right, is trauma that's happening to someone that you care and love about unconditionally and have no control over.
Yes.
And you're far away from, literally different part of the world. Yeah. What's the conversation that you're having with God in that moment?
That I trust him.
Oh, wow.
100%. And that, I don't normally choke up, but my faith has grown in the dark in more times than not in my life. And and that was a really, I don't want to think of it as a dark time. To me, dark is like spooky, scary dark. I say dark because it's unknown. It's because you're literally, the vision that I have is you're floating around in space, let's say, and you have no navigation, no direction whatsoever. You just don't know where you are, where you're going, where you're going to land. And you have to I had to fully put my trust in God that everything was going to turn out okay. And that's a tough place to be. But for me, it was either that or completely freak out.
Right. I'll take the freak out option, please.
Yeah. Right. Completely freak out and be crazy, mad, upset, like, oh my God, I need more information. What's happening? Blah, blah, blah. Or crying uncontrollably, like, like you see in the movies. And I chose to take the faith route and say, God, I trust you. And I'm gonna keep a cool head and a level head about this so I can accept the information that's going to come my way and understand it better, and also be a stronger, better means of support for Ben in those moments.
So take us through the rest of the story.
Oh, the rest of the story is that he did undergo surgery while he was in Afghanistan. And the first question that I asked when I was told Ben was shot in the leg, and that he'd undergone surgery and was recovering, is, did he lose his leg? Was he going to lose his leg? Because at that time, again, go back 10 years, the injuries of war, where it was all limb loss. That's what we saw in the media.
Right. Yeah.
Men coming back without limbs. And they said, yeah, his leg is fine. The surgery went fine. We just need him to wake up. Well, it came to be that he didn't wake up. When they went to turn the oxygen or the anesthesia down to wake him up, he didn't wake up. And he'd had a cardiac arrest during his recovery time. They were able to revive him, obviously, but that loss of oxygen, had an effect on his recovery. He was stable enough to make it through Germany. They transported him to Germany for about 24 hours. They weren't sure if he was going to stay there or not, and it actually prepared me to go to Germany possibly, but they stabilized him enough to get him to Walter Reed. So 4 days after he was shot in Afghanistan, he landed at Walter Reed, and my mother and I met him there. And he was not conscious. He had not regained consciousness since he went under for the surgery.
Wow.
Yeah. So the morning after he arrived, the doctor in charge of his care sat my mother and I down in a room and told us that they believed by manual testing that Ben was brain dead. And that was by having no reaction to a light shining in his pupils and the poking of the palm of the hand and the bottom of the foot and getting no reaction. However, a very official test has to be administered to determine that there is, in fact, no blood flowing to the brain. And they said that piece of equipment was very cumbersome, not readily available, and Ben had to be stable in order to undergo the procedure for that. So what that did was bought me time. That bought me time to spend with Ben. And what I did is I used that time for people to continue praying for Ben and asking for miracles in his name.
Yeah.
I knew what Ben's fate was going to be at that moment. People don't recover from brain death. Brain death is different than a coma. People wake up from comas. People don't wake up from brain death. However, I didn't have the official test results. And excuse me, I do believe in miracles.
Yeah.
I thought, miracles can happen.
Sure.
They are there, and I'm not going to ask people to stop praying until I have 100% without question, answer in front of me that my son is not going to survive. So for 3 days, 3 more days, I kept up the prayers. But unfortunately, on July 18th, 8 days after Ben was shot, he was determined to be brain dead. What that brain death did was enable Ben to become an organ donor.
Yeah, and this has become a big part of your ministry now, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
Tell us all about that, because the mutual friend who introduced us, that's where he started was about the incredible story of what Ben did and with his organs.
Yes. So when the Rangers prep for deployments, they fill out something called a blue book, which is their living will. It asks them all the questions that you might imagine would be asked in a will, in a living will, if you're sitting there filling this out, including what's to be done with your body, what you want at your funeral, what type of flowers, music, pallbearers, location, burial, all those things. One of the questions that is asked is, in the event of your death, do you wish to be an organ donor? And Ben wrote in yes. And the question following that asked, which ones? And Ben wrote in, any that are needed.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we had to, when that doctor sat with my mother and I on the day after his arrival to Walter Reed and our arrival, and told us they believed that he was brain dead, they asked me to consider organ donation for Ben. And I didn't hesitate. I didn't hesitate for 1 second, because when I was 15, my 11-year-old brother was hit by a car and killed. And he was an organ donor in 1982.
Wow.
And so I had carried this with me all these years. And that was my brother donating his organs way back then was something that brought comfort, solace, joy to me personally and my family, knowing that my brother lived on. It becomes a balance for your sorrow when you can think about the lives that were saved and enhanced because of your loved one and the decision that they made. Now, in my brother's case, he was 11, so the decision obviously was up to my parents and not up to my brother. But we had no question at all that had my brother been able to make that decision himself, he would have.
Sure.
Ben knew about my brother, of course.
Of course, right.
Growing up, and he knew that story, so that's why he wrote those answers in. He was aware of that, and that's why I didn't hesitate when they asked me. But Ben was 21. The decision was not mine. The decision was his, had he made it known legally somewhere. So after the doctor asked that question, we went in search of that blue book, and we found it. And so it was comforting to know that he did make those wishes known. So Ben's care then, once it was determined that he was brain dead, his care in the hospital went from that of trying to save Ben's life to preparing his body to save other lives.
Wow.
It was a huge change, a huge change. So as you can imagine, someone in Ben's condition is full of tubes and wires and cords, and
sure,
it's not pretty, and a lot of machines making a lot of noise in the room. And when his level of care changed to prepping his body to save other lives, a lot of those tubes and cords and wires were removed. And it was actually a very beautiful transition, and it was a very noticeable transition. And Ben's physical body, the way that it looked with him lying in his hospital bed, changed from, someone who looked to be very troubled, if you will, and fearful, just, somebody in that, in not a peaceful state, he's fighting.
Right.
Even though he's not conscious, he's fighting. And when that all changed, his whole coloring changed. He got color back in his cheeks, and he just looked like he was at peace.
Did the room feel different? Because as I hear you describe it, it feels to me as if like the Holy Spirit just kind of invaded that space in a completely different way.
I never heard words used like that to describe it, but that is exactly what happened. That is exactly what happened. He didn't even change rooms, but it felt like the room was completely transformed.
Wow.
Completely. Yeah, it was amazing. So when the night after my mom and I arrived and we learned that Ben was brain dead, I was in the hotel room with my mother and we were talking before we drifted off to sleep in the, dark. And it all of a sudden dawned on me that I wasn't going to have Ben physically in my life anymore. And I said, Mom, what am I going to do with all the love that I had for Ben? And she shared 4 very profound words with me and said, you'll figure it out.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom. Yeah, that's what I thought at the time. I, insert eye roll here, like, thanks, Mom. But very profound, very powerful words.
And speaking from experience.
Yeah, and speaking from experience, exactly.
Wow.
And she told me in that moment that I needed to tell Ben that I was okay with him leaving. That he needed to know that I would be okay with him leaving. And so that next day, that next night before we said goodbye for the night, I sat with Ben by myself and I told him that I was okay with him leaving. And I said that a lot of people had been praying for him and asking for miracles in his name. And I wanted him to know that I was okay with his decision to either keep those miracles and prayers for himself or give them away.
Yeah.
He chose to give them away.
Yeah.
And we got the first one, came rolling through the doors rather quickly, in that I waited until, the day after, late in the day of the 18th, when I knew without a doubt that Ben was brain dead, to post a message on this Caring Bridge page that I had set up for Ben, where you can update people and they can log in and see the updates. And I had stated that, Ben had been determined to be brain dead and was going to be removed from life support and would be donating his organs. Well, the next morning, we were to meet in the hotel we were staying at with somebody from the military regarding the death. And this person was late. They called very last minute and said that they were stuck in traffic and we had maybe 30, 45 minutes or so till she got there. So I went out to the hotel lobby and logged onto the computer in the Caring Bridge site and started scrolling through the messages.
Yeah.
And there was a message from my cousin, Maria, my first cousin, who lived in Chicago, and offering a nice condolence message, sympathy to me. So sorry about, learning the news about Ben, but thanks for agreeing with his wish to be an organ donor because my friend Judy is waiting for a heart. And I went, what? Like, oh my God, ding, 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 ding. I felt like, these neon lights went off and bells were, whistles and bells were ringing. I was like, oh my gosh, I know somebody who needs a heart. Well, when the doctor sat down with my mom and my dad had come at that point too, and I in the room for me to decide which of Ben's organs to donate, they told us that I could designate a recipient for any of his organs so long as that person was on the official list. And we all looked at each other like, we don't know anybody. Do you know anybody? No, I don't know anybody. Do you know anybody? Okay, next. We didn't even sink in. Obviously it did later. That was, a day and a half later, all of a sudden I'm reading this message going, oh my gosh, now I know somebody who knows somebody who needs a heart. So I go running back to this conference room and my dad is in there waiting. And I said, Dad, we need to call Maria because she has a friend who needs a heart. Okay. So we make a couple phone calls. We get our people in touch with her people and just leave it up to God, right?
Right.
So we do this meeting, go on with the day. Later that afternoon, early evening, my dad and I and a couple of the Rangers that served with Ben including the one that escorted him from Afghanistan, were walking down the street to go have dinner, and I get a call from Maria. And I answer the phone, and she said, "Jill, you're not going to believe this, but Judy and Ben are a match."
Stop it.
Yeah. And I went, "What?" Like, oh my gosh. And
I got all the feels right now.
Yeah. This is one where I get the feels too, even 10 years later. My dad, I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't walk. I just froze. And my dad said, "What?" I just said, "It's Maria, and they're a match." And she said, my mother, and her mother is a devout Catholic, said, "This is a true Catholic miracle."
Yeah.
This is not green lights all the way to work. This is,
right. We just went big time here.
This one big time here. I was like, oh my gosh. And so as I mentioned, I froze and I couldn't walk. I was so overjoyed. I was so overjoyed, yet here I was facing the death of my only child. And then I was feeling this incredible amount of joy. And what I felt in that moment was that my feet were embedded in cement, that I couldn't move. But in the same moment, if I would have raised my arms to flap them like they were wings, I would have taken flight.
Oh, wow.
And I believe that a miracle is having equal amounts of sorrow and joy at the same time. And I'm not talking an inch or two. I'm talking an ocean of each. And I was standing right in the middle of the two of them. It was a true miracle.
That's incredible. What did his buddy, his Ranger buddy, say in the moment?
I have no idea.
I was just curious what it must feel like. I just had a moment where I was wondering, what a surreal moment for everyone else as well.
It was. I know that we stood there, stopped in time, like time just stopped around us in that circle on the sidewalk, and I can picture it. Actually was very sunny and bright outside, and we all just stopped and were in awe. But I don't remember the words that they shared.
And I imagine in moments like that, words really aren't that important, are they?
No, they're not. So that was miracle number one that came, and that was, just a couple days before I left Washington and left Ben there.
And then a lot of his organs ended up being used, didn't it? That was the first of many miracles.
That was the first, yes. And so that was his heart. So his heart went to a woman named Judy who lives in suburban Chicago. And pretty amazing story. I have met her multiple times. I still am in contact with her.
Yeah, I mean, I heard a story about a way that you met her that, were you speaking at an organ donation event?
Yeah, that was the first time we met her. The very first time that I spoke publicly to an audience. 1,100 people. In front of 1,100 people, yeah.
Because why not go big, right?
I know, right?
Typical Ranger, right?
Exactly. Yeah, just like Ben, go big or go home. Baptism by fire is what I like to say.
Yeah.
First public speech, 1,100 people. Let's do it. Sure, why not? But I spoke with Judy, Ben's heart recipient, and it was a national conference about organ donation. We were invited guests, obviously, and spoke together on stage. So it was pretty incredible.
Listen, I get teary-eyed just thinking about it.
Yeah, I know. It has that effect on people.
Well, as it should. It's sacred and holy and good.
Yes. So that was his heart. As I mentioned earlier, Ben made the wish writ in his handwriting, any of his organs that were needed. So all of his major organs, bone, skin, and tissue were donated. So that included his heart, kidneys, liver, and then bone, skin, and tissue.
Wow.
So he saved 6 of his fellow Rangers on that battlefield that cost him his life. So he has those 6 lives that he saved. And then he directly saved the people who received his heart, kidneys, and liver. With the donation of bone, skin, and tissue, he enhanced the lives of about 55 more people.
Wow. That's incredible.
It really is. It really is.
How does that change the way that you reframe one of the, as you said, that steel door? What does it do in hindsight?
Well, it creates an opening in that steel door. It allows some light to come through.
How's that impacted you in the last, over a decade? Like, how's it changed things?
I have the ability to immediately recognize selfless people. Ben was selfless in multiple ways. Twice a hero is what I've heard him referred to as, hero in life, hero in death. And truly, to serve your country and sign your name on the dotted line, as you did as well, Tony, to be willing to give up your life. And Ben was willing to give up his life and did. And then as an organ donor, he also gave of himself to save other lives. And the beautiful thing about organ donation is you're saving lives of complete strangers. There's no way. I mean, you just don't. You're not going to know who they are because you're no longer physically here.
Right.
A living donation is a different scenario because you know who that person is. And often it's a family member or a friend. In the event of your death, when you donate organs, you don't know who those people are going to be. And what I tell people is to sign on that dotted line or check that box to become an organ donor. You will become the answer to another family's prayers. For me, as somebody who has a deep level of faith, the greatest gift, the greatest thing that I can share with people is to answer their prayers. And we don't always have the ability to do that because we don't have the power, right?
Sure.
In many ways. This is a guaranteed way. You are going to answer the prayers of people you don't know. It's a beautiful circle. It really is.
Now you've kind of used all of this and it's become a platform for you in a lot of ways to share a message of hope and positivity. And you wrote a book about it, right? The Heart of a Ranger.
The Heart of a Ranger is a book that was written about Ben. I didn't write it, but I collaborated with the author and helped him with it quite a bit. Yes.
Yeah. And I understand the need for that, the delineation, but as you had to live it. So that's, for me, as far as I'm concerned, you wrote it, sister. So it's all good here. But what do you find, how do you define your calling now as a mom who's sustained so much grief over an extended period of time, who's worked with soldiers and organ donation? I mean, like, that it's a lot. How do you describe what God has called you to today?
I believe that my life purpose was definitely created through Ben and because of Ben. And it was given to me not because Ben died, but because he lived. Much as we are saved because Jesus died. I mean, because Jesus lived, not because he died. And I say the same thing about Ben. I am who I am because Ben lived, not because he died. And I am the vessel that still stands here on earth on my 2 feet that gets to continue the mission. The baton has been handed off to me. I believe that we are still working together between that veil of heaven and earth. And it's my mission to honor not just Ben, but all of our fallen and all of the families of our fallen and all of the families of our military, to educate people about organ donation and to share a message of hope and faith with people who face adversity in many different ways. Adversity wears a lot of faces, and I've experienced a lot of loss in my life. That is my primary adversity, but it's come in different ways as well. I also lost my house 4 years ago to a fire. My house was struck by lightning, and I pretty much lost everything. That fire gave me, it released the tethers that were holding me down. It was the townhome, the home that Ben and I lived in together for 13 years. I was reluctant to leave, even though I wanted to leave. So in many ways, that fire became a blessing to me because I started traveling more. I lived in 2 other states. I'm in Minnesota now, but I know I'm going to be moving on because this nomadic spirit got lit in me. It was a blessing in disguise. What I've learned to do, Tony, is see the light in the dark. I've learned to find the blessings in things that normally would knock people off their tracks. And I said, nope, you can knock me off, but I'm going to get right back on and I'm going to keep that engine going and just keep going because my mission isn't complete until God calls me home. So I'm not going to stop.
I love that. I love that mentality. It's a Ranger mentality, actually. It's, I'll always place the mission first. That resonates. I think that there are probably some people listening right now who understand what their calling is, but maybe they're having a bad day. And I can't imagine the number of bad days that you've had. What do you do to pull yourself out of the bad days?
Well, the first thing I do is I don't divide my days into days. I think of days as moments, as many moments all bottled up into one. And so you won't hear me say that I've had a bad day. I view the bad moments as moments and know that this too shall pass. I absolutely struggle. There's no question. I've said a lot of really positive, hopeful things, and I have a very strong faith, but I'm human. I suffer
Right.
from being human, and I have emotions just like everybody else does. I focus on the haves and not the have-nots. I focus on the fact that my son lived and not that he died. That keeps his spirit alive. I think of all that I have to be grateful for. And I just don't focus on the negative. I accentuate the positive as much as I can. And I learn to listen to my body. And that may sound funny, but not long after Ben died, I would just hit walls. I would just become physically and emotionally exhausted, but I wanted to keep going because that's the kind of person that I always was. I worked a lot. I was just go. Always very, I just had, this endurance, obviously. And I didn't recognize when my body was telling me, hey, you need to rest. You need to rest. And I would literally just like drop on the couch and pass out, and then I would wake up and be rejuvenated and go, oh, okay, I just needed a nap. As silly as that sounds, your body knows, grief is very physical. It's not just emotional, it's very physical. So listen to the signs that your body's telling you and rest. Rest. I heard a pastor in a sermon say not long ago that rest is power. And I believe that, when we're well rested mentally and physically, it does make us more capable of keeping those feet going one in front of the other.
That's incredible. Love that. I love that. So one of the questions I like to ask all my guests at the end of our podcast is if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, and maybe we go back to 11-year-old Ben, and you see him right there. What are you telling yourself when he's 11? What piece of advice would you like to go back and give yourself?
Oh man. I thought you were going to ask me what would I tell Ben. That might be a little bit easier. Right?
Well, it might be a little easier. Interested to hear that answer as well. But I'd be interested to hear what you tell yourself, because your life has completely changed multiple times.
It has.
Since that 11-year-old boy said he wanted to be in the Army.
I have this as a screensaver on my phone right now, and I very recently put it there. And I said, when I did that, I wished I would have put it there a long time ago. And it just says, trust in the Lord.
Yeah.
And it's Proverbs 3, 3-5, I think. Don't quote me on that.
Proverbs 3, maybe 5 and 6.
It's Proverbs 3, 5.
Got it.
How about that? Proverbs, trust in the Lord. And that's what I would tell myself back then, because that's what I've done over and over and over again, through Ben's life and through all of the adversities that I've faced since Ben made that transition 10 years ago, is trusting that God is never going to let us down. He's never going to leave us. He's never going to leave us. He's always there with us, and he knows where he's taking us. You know, he's the leader. He's the leader, and I got to follow him and trust him.
So if my listeners want to go and learn more about you and what you're doing and how you're sharing the love and positivity and your message, where can they go to find you?
I have a website that is called IamJillStephenson.com. And it's the 2 words, I am, and then my name, JillStephenson.com. I am Jill Stephenson.
Yeah, we'll link to it in the show notes. That's also where they can purchase your book, or the book, The Heart of the Ranger, as well, and your collaboration piece there if they want to follow you. And you speak all around the country, don't you?
I do. I've been doing that for 10 years, and I love doing it. I love meeting people. I love traveling. I love sharing my story. So
if they're looking for someone to come and talk about some of the messages that you so wonderfully share, I would strongly encourage them to talk to you. I don't think they'd be regret it in any sense of the word. So
thank you.
Jill, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your time with me and allowing me to come on and be a guest on your show, Tony.
Well, my heart for you and for Rangers and for our fallen is, there aren't adequate words. So thank you for your service, and thank you for Ben and raising such a good young man.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's episode. I hope you found it as meaningful and as humbling as I did. More than anything, I just want to say thank you to all the veterans out there, the people who have sacrificed so much, their families, all the people who made it possible. It just resonates deep inside my heart, and I'm so thankful that we serve such a big God with so many incredible people who show unconditional love. As always, if this episode was helpful for you, I'd love to hear about it. You can hit me up on my website, twmilt.com, on Instagram, Twitter @twmilt, or on Facebook, Reclamation Podcast with Tony Meltenberger. Thanks, guys. Can't wait to see you guys real soon.